Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. We're going to get started now with the third and final panel. So just invite everyone to take their seats and get comfortable. I know it's been a little chilly in the house, so we've warmed it up appropriately a lot. And thank you all for, many of you have been here since early this morning, for participating in these conversations, all situated around the opening of the exhibition Adiós, Utopia, Dreams and Deceptions in Cuban Art. And so now our third and final panel will continue to look at artistic production on the island today. And I think a beautiful theme that came out in the last panel, which is central to the curator's approach to the exhibition, was to forge an intergenerational dialogue among artists. And I think that came across so beautifully in the last panel, and I know it will be a topic that will come through in talking about the work and talking about what it means to make work in Cuba today. So I want to welcome and acknowledge Cristina Vives, who's sitting in the center of the panel, who is a wonderful colleague, curator, independent curator, who has supported contemporary art in Cuba and written a great deal about the work of individual artists and artistic production on the island. And she has graciously stepped in. She wasn't involved in the organization of the exhibition, but supports many of the artists and is connected with many of the artists and shows a number of their works in Cuba, and has stepped in for Rene Francisco, one of the co-curators of the exhibition, who was ill and not able to travel from Havana. So Cristina, thank you for your gracious jumping in and helping forge a conversation. So as I mentioned, Cristina is an independent curator and art critic based in Havana. She graduated from the University of Havana with a degree in art history and now represents contemporary artists from Cuba and has run a project space, a gallery space in her home and in partnership with the Norwegian Embassy, which is situated next to where they live. So a thriving program that Cristina and her family bring to the community. She's the co-author of Memoria, Artes Visuales Cubanas del Siglo XX, and has contributed and written on for a number of publications and catalogs, and most recently curated a show that I saw in Havana during the Bienal, Flavio Garciandia's work at the Centro de Arte Contemporáneo Wilfredo in 2014. Also, Cristina has a history in the Twin Cities. She came and curated a project here with 10 photographers together with Vance Gellert, who's here in the audience as well, used to run Parts Gallery. And through their collaboration and friendship, did several projects here in the 2000s, early 2000s. So there are many friends who've come to connect with Cristina and see her again. So a great welcome back, and welcome back to the Twin Cities and to the Walker. And on her panel today, and she will introduce them, Yoan Capote, Javier Castro, Wilfredo Prieto, José Figueroa, and Glenda León. Welcome.
Okay, can you hear? Okay, now. So as Olga said, because our friend, dear friend, Rene Francisco wasn't able to come, and there was a minor crisis at the very last minute, I said, yes, with pleasure, I will replace his space. Because the few time we all had to organize this third panel, I decided not to be worried about that. So I forgot all the questions and topics that Rene would like to discuss with them, and I asked them if I can introduce my own statement, and from that statement they can answer some questions. And they said yes. I accept to do this, first of all, because Olga asked. I can't say no to Olga. Secondly, because all of these guys around me are friends for a long, long time. And we have shared many projects together, many conversations. So we know each other, not only because the art, but because life. All of us are based in Havana. All of us see frequently each other. All of them are very young, for me, are very young, except one, that is Figueroa, that I have to say is very young too, in his art, in his mind, and he is not a friend, he's my husband. So it's a complicated situation for me, so please, Figueroa, make things easier, okay? Okay, so now let's go to the point. The two panels, previous panels, very interesting panels, very well conducted, talk about the show, the art of the different guests, the different artists, about the topics, the main topic of the show, Utopia, about the historical condition of this show. All of that is undoubtedly. But because this is the third, and in Cuban, in Spanish tradition, we say, a la tercera va la vencida. That's a popular phrase. I decided not to talk about the show, not to talk about pieces of art in particular. All my friends agree with that. And I prefer to talk not about past, not about history, even when we have to be based on that, but to talk about future. This is my intention, because it's my, is my position in front of life. I'm always thinking in the future. And this show, that is really historical, like everybody agree, has a special condition for me. Because when you see history, you are forced and you have the responsibility to think in the future. And because that, I decided to organize like 5 questions, one for each one, about some topics of the future, how they see in the very personal way the future in the field they grow up, they move daily, they live. It means it's not the true, it's not the whole truth, but you know that the whole truth is done, is completed with the very personal and intimate truth. I have to confess, and from this moment, please, I'm going to talk in Spanish, better for me and better for my friends. A partir de este momento hablo en español.
From now on, I'm going to speak in Spanish. I must confess that when I got involved for the first time with this exhibition, it was for a different reason. I never was a member of the organizing group of the curators, but I was very close to them. And when I got involved for the first time, they were still in the process of discussing the curating techniques or the preparation of the book that will accompany this show. And I must confess that, and until now, I'm not happy or comfortable with the title. Goodbye, Utopia. Adiós, Utopia. I'm telling you that because I guess I want to make a point in this dialogue, but I honestly think that the historical processes are processes that never stop. The Utopia, like any other process in history, and in particular the Cuban history, had moments of highs, moments of lows, like some were like lightning, when we were sometimes stepping backwards, some we were stepping forwards, and we are at a critical moment, but I resist as a citizenship and as member of the world art. I don't know which one first. I feel that I'm responsible. I have the responsibility to maintain a utopia. That's why when I dealt with the title, I dared and respectfully I told my curator colleagues I would have preferred between utopias, because that's what we need. In my opinion, right now we have to bring back some utopias, not identical, not because they are very diverse. The utopia at the national level, the big Cuban project with all the mistakes and failures, but also the individual utopias. And when we add all up and we think about the historical process, they accumulate. We must integrate them. Most of the voices that we can, the most voices that we can. This is not coming from a demagogue. This is like a surviving effort. That's the way I see it. That's why I want to talk about the future, that it is possible to bring back utopias, especially from the artistic point of view. And I was talking to my colleagues about that to start the discussion. And since I know their points of view, or I feel that I know them, I'm going to make 5 questions, and I'm going to make ask those questions in order. First, Figueroa. Obviously, I'm very close to you. I'm going to read it, but I'm going to be very precise with the question. When you took Olga's picture, your mother, the November 1st, 1967, when you left Cuba, you were 21. The life was in front of you. Was that the end or the beginning of something? Now that this picture is being brought into context here, and this is probably the most interesting part, do you see that picture as a sign of what has to happen in our future, in our immediate future? Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming. When I took that picture 50 years ago, it was not a beginning, it was not the end. It was something unknown. I didn't have plans. I couldn't live with my family because it was not possible. I was at a military age. My father had left with my younger brother. I was left a little bit with my second brother, who couldn't travel either. There was no beginning, there was no end. It was just a situation that was happening, part of my life. It was a picture. I took a picture with my camera, and I was hiding it from the authorities. If they saw it, they could put me in jail. It was forbidden. Many years later, the picture came out to light. When I turned 50, I presented it in a gallery, and it became, it acquired certain value or validity. And over the years, it's still something very valid as a good image of something that breaks a family. It's still valid because the Cubans still are leaving Cuba. The situation is still happening. Nobody thought it was the end or the beginning. We wished it wouldn't have happened, but when I was coming here, and it was a coincidence, I was at the lab on November 2nd. I wanted to bring a copy to my mother. It was 50 years, and I thought it would be the same. And it was like an analogy. Many of you, the picture of Capa in the disembarkment in Normandy. It was the beginning of the end of the Second World War. What happened if we had the same circumstances that created that Normandy Day? 50 years later, the same condition, disembarking, and we are still continuing 50 years later with the same circumstances, not only at the airport, but also by sea, and it has been something very hurtful and sad too. And in certain way, it marked my life. I grew up by myself. I tried to get into the Utopia. When you're 21, you are not aware of what can happen. My family was normal. I thought they were advocates. They believed in Fidel. The revolution destroyed the ideals that my parents had. They took their business and they had to leave Cuba. There were no options for surviving. So I stayed. This is what I get. This is my adventure. I tried to get involved, and I went far in that work with the party, despite all the people who didn't believe in me. And still, many don't trust me, and many of them live in the United States, and I have met with them. So that utopia that I tried to join didn't work for me. I've been lucky, 53 years working as a photographer. I started in 1964, and I have seen everything with my camera in Cuba. All these young people, artists, and they have all been in front of my camera in their careers. What I call the privilege of the lens. I've had that privilege, and I have used that privilege to the utmost. We were preparing some images that I wanted to show, but Cristina wants to talk about questions. What's going to happen in the future? I see a sad future because we have the same circumstances. The new generations have less projects in their lives because what we talked about in the past, the solution for everyone, hasn't worked. The economy didn't work. The education, despite the fact that it's free, in 50 years it has been going bad. I have a son. He studied at the university, but he didn't have where to live. I have to live. I can't live in a closet. That's where he was staying. So he left, and he's outside, and the story repeats. So I think that utopia, I like the title that you proposed, Between Utopias, because we have to have another point of view. We have to move forward. In my case, I decided that I'm going to do it from Cuba. Other colleagues come and go. It's a valid position, but I've had the chance to help to move forward, to change, to improve for my children, for my grandchildren, for people who come after me. I have images that I wanted to show, and this is from the 1960s, and I wanted to explain why I wanted to show you. I selected some pictures from the 60s. We were talking about Corrales, who were taking pictures of the epic. I was working with Corda. Well, that's when I started working. I was taking pictures of my girlfriend, my friends in the 1960s. Many years later, it was not made public. Was made public until years later. This is when my family starts in the exile. These are pictures of my aunts and uncles, my cousins. We had lunches or dinners who were the last ones every time someone left between 1965 and 1967. Little by little, the group was getting smaller. Little by little, until the last group, my father, my mother, my two brothers, the youngest one who went with my father, and his name is Fidel because he was born in 1959, and my mother when she left. This was a process I started later after that in a magazine, Revista Cuba, to take pictures of the country. I found these things that were very interesting for me. The philosophy, until very, very recently, it was more rural life and less urban life, because Castro said that cities were parasites, that we had to support the country and forget the cities. I don't know if that's why the city of Havana is falling, because we didn't create awareness on how to make it better. In the 1970, Nixon was the president. There were posters to offend. It was something that Cuba considered offensive, and there were struggles in the streets protesting. This is one protest. Another one, part of a Utopia, where the whole country started to plant sugar cane, because we were going to solve the problem with tons of sugar. It was a failure. It was an idealistic idea, and it failed. This is like a mirror-like image. In the 1970s, there were also mobilizations in Cuba. In the 1980s, you start to see a different vision. Even in my point of view, when questioning certain things. This is the image that where I realized that I was looking at things in a different way. This is Martí, a national hero, and these are things that you place in schools, a bust. But it has lost the significance that wanted to be given to Martí. Miami uses this image too. It's something that can be used for everything. The image of the Che Guevara has become an object that is mostly for merchandising. This is where I was drawing my copies. I was printing that image for many years. Hundreds of thousands of images in my lab, the first lab. I'm drawing the images there, and I thought that image would be interesting. So it's like making something that in merchandising it, you're bringing the significance to a lower level. And that was in 1982, and what you see here is everyone who smokes has to use this.
But it was authorized by Alberto Cora. Yes, I can tell you that as one of the big contradictions. Yes, it wasn't like, many things they do in a clandestine way in the black market. So, okay, let me finish with this. Let me finish with these two pictures. I ask you to make things easier for me. Disculpen, usted es el mayor del grupo, así que le voy a dar un minuto más. Well, what I want to say also that in Cuba, in all the meetings, all the assembly, the National Assembly, they have a table with the elders. They put the elder and the younger too. So this is the same. But in Cuba, in that table, the last one to talk is the elder, because the young ones are going to say something politically incorrect. So then the elder has to fix it. No, but that's a different point of view, and here they inverted it. The younger ones are going to check and everything I say and rectify it. So this picture, and then one more, and then we're done. This is one of my few pictures with a name. It's called Homage. I took this in El Malecón from the Hotel Capri in Havana. I was coming back from Miami. In Cuba at that time, nobody was talking about all the dead people, all the Cubans dying on the rafts, the ones that did not make it to the United States, etc. When I came back to the Havana, I said, I need an image. I was working at the Hotel Capri, and I took this picture. And fortunately, it's still very relevant nowadays. I say unfortunately because people are still leaving Cuba. Well, not only Cuba, they're leaving from North Africa, from Europe, from the Mediterranean. There's still people dying. The Dominicans going to Puerto Rico. Puerto Ricans want to leave the United States, you know. So that's one of the images. This one, I wanted to show this. This was January 20th, 2009, the day that President Obama took presidency in the White House. When they were celebrating that ceremony, I was taking this picture, and I found this. This is the American Embassy with the billboard with the human rights during Bush. And that day they say President Obama just took power, and they wrote this for the revolution, because for many of us, Obama was the hope and the future for us. And I do have one more that I'm going to show to see, so they can see what happened. Many years later, Olga, my mother, bringing food to Cuba. It was a failure. The project, the Utopia, was a failure. Thank you. Thank you. Lo hizo muy bien, Figueroa. Lo hizo bien. Now I realize that Figueroa has finished, but since we haven't talked about this, well, he and I did many times in our lives, but not for this type of conversation. I did not know how he was going to finish it, and I didn't expect the food from Olga Figueroa. But I do want to go back to your question. The answer is yes. Yes, it's still the image of Olga. You're not going to answer, I will. That's the way that I can see you have. It's still Olga living. Is that your present and your future in your point of view? Yes. Good. Now, arriving here in Minneapolis, I was talking to Yoan on the hallway. Different subjects. And all of a sudden, Yoan said something that I thought it was a very important statement coming from his generation. The statement to me is, my Miami is Havana. That phrase, I don't know how it's being translated, the simultaneous interpreters, but in a metaphor means his Miami, his goal. In a certain way, it's already in Havana. If I understood very well the sense you wanted to give to your metaphor. And I want to ask you if this is a decision, a conviction, a possibility, a limitation. What do you see it? How do you see it? How do you see it now and for the future? Well, that was just a phrase I said that it just came out of my brain. And I can confirm that, yes. What happens is the process of migrations are very private, where Every process depends the family they're coming from.
Immigration process, I think, are very personal issues. So it depends from your family, it depends from what kind of experience your family had. So I exist some kind of immigration process that is between among countries from one country to the other, but exists also the migration of the countryside to the capitals or to the cities. In my case, I arrived to Havana in 1991, and my experience in my childhood was in a very difficult, tough, rough neighborhood in Pinal del Rio, which is the more poor, by tradition, the poorest place in Cuba. So when I arrived in Havana in the beginning of a special period, I saw so many young guys in the school, like despair because of the food, and I was like easy. I was eating whatever. I remember they joked with me, "Look at what you eat. How do you eat that?" So it depends. So I respect a lot the people that have to leave to Miami, and I understand the reasons because I read the story. But as soon as I arrived to Havana, I saw my family. I think I am a good example of those people that have a big duty with his parents. I didn't have any family in Havana, and neither in Miami. So I look at my old family, because only my brother and me are the young people that have the challenge of sustaining that family. So I said to all of them, "Don't worry, if it's not in art, we'll be in the black market in the street in Havana, but I was going to support all of you." So I arrived with this power in my side, with the will to Havana, and I realized that one artist I listened, I'm not going to mention names, one artist was talking about he sold a drawing $800. So I talked to my family in Pinal del Rio, and I said, "Now I can tell you that I don't need to go to Florida. I'm going to support you from here." I was just studying, but I was pretty sure that everything depends on what you have inside. So my friends that have the courage of leaving Cuba by sea and that sometimes send me a message, "Yoan, are you going to come?" And I said to them, "Hey, my friend, my Miami is Havana, because I already did the struggle you are having in Florida, I'm having it here, and maybe worse, because there is nothing, it's very difficult, but I found a parallel between the things they were telling me they were doing, the part-times, whatever, and what I was doing for making a living and studying art. So I respect the experience of every person, and I think one of the big problems of Cubans is that some Cubans want to impose their opinions to the others. And I think the respect to the feelings of others is the beginning of a peaceful future. So my experience was that once Jose Martí used to say that the man only loves what he creates. Since all the base of what I did, my family, my studio, everything what I did in my life till today is made in Cuba. So that doesn't have nothing to do with ideology. I did it because of my effort. And so I have this kind of love to this place, more than Pinal del Rio, because it's where I really... And in terms of nationality and love to the homeland, I think it is something that has nothing to do with politics. In the other hand, my work is very critique, and I always consider my work like a kind of expression. My big challenge as an artist, since I listened this word zeitgeist, the idea of the spirit of the moment, I always was thinking about how my challenge was to live in my art a kind of consolidation or synthesis of the spirit of my moment. And this duty with my reality, like the same that you had, Figueroa, was what also encouraged me to stay in Cuba. I don't have this kind of projection to the future because my reality is so intense to think in the future. I just think in the today, every day, like every Cuban, have to think why I'm going to do, what I'm going to do to improve my life today. And maybe the future is the sum of all this effort every day. So in my works, I don't know if I have time for show my stuff. Yeah. Well, this piece, which is in the beginning of the presentation because it's the one is in the exhibition, is I realized that my concerns about art were very focused in psychological, intense experience. And I realized that through the psychological or through the emotional feelings, I could find a balance between the political or local concerns with the universal human situations. And I think that is a very important challenge of artists, because political situations change with the future, but we have to think in what is timeless. So that's why I start my works always with titles, writing stress, paranoia, feelings that I experiment in my intense life, and trying to describe it in a piece of art that can be a kind of representation. You know, Bertolt Brecht used to say that art is not a mirror for reflecting the reality, it's a hammer for changing it. But I think Bertolt Brecht didn't do what I say that human being has to do. He didn't respect those artists that were not activists. And in my case, I consider that must be both. And I like both, but in my case, I prefer to maintain my work as a mirror and not like a hammer. So this piece, I took my own teeth, and I used to be affected by bruxism, grinding teeth at night. So I went to a clinic to check my teeth, and I started to collect the teeth of a lot of people to talk about the tension and oppression, like part of the DNA of our experience and our history. So this is the process. I like it when I put all the teeth together. It looks like a crowd of people supporting. And you know what? The resistance and oppression in Cuba is not only something after communism, it's in the history of our, in the DNA of the American, Latin America, in our country too. Oppression, resistance, dictators is part of the cycle. In my work, there is a kind also, like in other artists here, kind of balance between the individual and the collective. Because when I put my own wisdom teeth together with the others, supporting the weight, there is a kind of optimism too in the piece, although maybe you don't see it. That is the unity, permit that they don't get broken. Now I will go to the main pieces because this is a version of stress in 17 tons of concrete on the teeth in bronze. And this piece is very symbolic for me too, because I took them all of the bones from different provenance of different people and cast it in bronze and put in equilibrium 250 kilograms in sustaining. And I call it self-portrait, each one of us, inspired in the phrase of Cesar Vallejo, a very important poet from Peru, Peruvian poet, that is speaking about my bones are not mine, maybe I stole them. The Fishhooks paintings, inspired in this issue of the migration, I was reading about the iron curtain, a concept from the Cold War, used by Churchill. And I realized that our Berlin Wall is the water, our geographical frustration of being surrounded by water. Thousands of fishhooks surrounding the malleable, pictures of the crowds in political meetings in a real Rubik cube. Demagogia, the sink where people can wash their hand, brainwashing. Abstinencia, the mold of the hands of several anonymous people in Cuba. I just took it in the sign language and they tried to say politics, but they don't know if they will be listening. Bilingual money. I took this piece talks about the big contradiction in Cuba and the nonsense that we experiment after the 90s when you have dollars in one hand, communism in the other. So I took $0.25 and 20 cents of Cuban money from my pocket, and when I did the assemblage, José Martí is wearing the hair of Washington. And Washington using the hair of Martí. liberty is broken by patria o muerte. And 1962, very symbolical date. So it's almost a ready-made, but very symbolical about this contamination that we have in Cuba, which is very difficult. Cuba has so many sides. It depends on from what perspective you analyze it. You will be revolutionary or against revolutionary. Coito, I put in the real banknote figures in sexual positions, and one penetrate the other. Apertura. Chirurgical scissors made in handmade as a prototype of Cuba and Florida, which is about any future in Cuba have to be very delicate because it's the pain from both sides. We have to be very careful, even me here speaking, because in order don't hurt any of both sides or accept the pain from both sides. Migrant, an uprooted tree, the drama. Open mind is a more optimistic work. A metaphor that our mind must be like a public park. Hopefully in the future, the utopia, that one day we will have this mind open to accept the ideas of the others. Doesn't matter if it's from Florida, from Japan, or wherever. So when I was working on that, I realized that the walls looks like maps, so I include the map of Cuba in one of the walls. And this is the last one, where I was invited to Nuit Blanche in Toronto. So in the event, they used the crowd control barricades. What I did was to lift them, all of them, like the taboos we have in mind, like the things we have to do in this country, in my country too, and start to live a new moment where we can freely ease and interact one with the other. Thank you so much.
Gracias, Yoan. Excelente.
Now I want to go back to the right with Wilfredo Prieto. And I want to go to a field that was mentioned briefly in the previous panel at the end. But I want to go into detail there. I'm going to ask Wilfredo because in the last conversation we had, we were talking about that. The traffic and the transportation routes and the possibilities that exist that they are creating in the cultural space in Cuba. I asked Wilfredo not only as an artist, but also as a manager of projects, because he moves ideas, he moves other artists, and he carries out curator projects. And I wanted to ask him what we're lacking in our system. How do you see it? Tell me if you feel that it's changing and that the institution is not being aware of that. Is it changing because of the individual efforts? Is it a reality that do we have to live with a new reality, or do we have to destroy it? We have to solve that question, and I wanted to ask Wilfredo in his dual role as that's a difficult topic for the artist, because I can give you my humble opinion talking about my work I think that the institution, the art, has to summarize the experience of individuals. And you're giving a response to your circumstances. If you look at what's happening in many countries, we see in the 90s many super productions in museums and creating a cultural vacuum in other places. So this is a reaction, like an alarm, we have to create new systems. I think that we're talking about this an age where you have the most censoring. Most of the artists should not be complacent and should carry out productions that respond to interests that are valid, not only the merchandise. And so it's like a prostitution of what you like. It's not solving your concern, your questions, and you're creating an environment that we have to question. When you see concretely in Cuba as a system, as a political system and social system, economical system, I like to think about the idea that the crisis is the best driver for progress, because you're generating questions, you're generating so you're showing in this exhibition, and if you go through it, and if you have a national exhibition in any context, even if it's in London or in France, you have to start seeing that you're responding to certain needs, and that has an inertia. And then sometimes you have to be politically correct, and sometimes you can't question firmly some things. When you have exhibits like this, you feel that you can create some change, you can bring some questions. So the art is responding to this situation. I start thinking about the example the Alexi presented, that you have a certain activity, you have a freedom of creation. That's something unique in the generation of the 80s in Cuba. And at the present time, you have certain advantages. I've always said, when they ask me about the special period, that was a luxurious time for me. It was different for me. And I responded to certain values. So you have a responsibility to create change in yourself and be within the context. So it has always been very interesting for me in how you can see this paradigm, how you can study the education of new artists, how you can present your art. When we talked about the institution, when it's slow, when it doesn't work well, it's a positive advantage, because if you see the School of Art, when they have bright teachers, the artists become part of that mechanism. But when you don't have that, you have to reinvent, create your own way, so you have a balance in negative situation. It's something contradictory, but it's also an advantage. So Cuba, in that sense, being isolated, having a different political system, a different economy, underdeveloped, cultural aspects that are different, that makes you have a different vision. And I wouldn't summarize it in the relationship between U.S. and Cuba. You cannot understand this vision of the exhibit as a political vision. I think that it's a cultural vision, and obviously those are topics that are critical. We would be talking about a religious reality if we were in the past. Right now we have different conflicts. And this is not only reflected in the economical world, in the information world. It's interesting for me that you see the Weiwei effect an artist with values that are high quality, in my opinion, has an important role to play at the international level. It gives me a certain direction to see those values. So in Cuban art, we have a responsibility. It is easy for any of us to create a piece of work, a piece of art, looking for censure, or something to help the media to understand things. So it's easy for us be tomorrow in the New York Times and not an artist from Mexico. So there's certain ethical value that we have to see. Then, and how you can achieve that artistic value, but not using merchandise strategies or press strategies. That's what I wanted to say. I think that there was I'm going to show the work very fast. This is the piece that we have in the exhibit. It's called Politico. I present exterior. I have been convinced about the winter here, and it is difficult to understand there the black and white of the flags. This is holy water. Sometimes we don't see it, but you sometimes have to look around you, and sometimes you see that holy water. This is, you can see here the toilet paper, but it's newspaper. This is called the Perfect Museum. It's silicone implants that were placed. You can even touch them, and the temperature is like a human body temperature. This is a very significant work of art, because during the time that was more critical in 1993, I was studying in Trinidad at the School of Arts. It was difficult to get enough food, and one day I found that we only had rice and no salt. So in that case, I have been a child, 14, 15 years old. It was, what are my options? Do I look for another profession? Do I go to my parents to eat a little bit, or study art? So you pinch your nose, you eat rice, and decide to continue studying art. This is a problem that you have to solve when you're 15 years old. Well, that's the sacrifice that comes with your life, to know what your objectives are and overcome difficulties, basic difficulties. These decisions mark your life. This piece, I don't know what piece it is, but this is something that about two horses that break their rope. It's like a sculpture called the performance sculpture. This is shed with caviar. Yep. La sensación. This is the last one. It's okay. This is an exhibit that I presented, talking about disobedience. I wanted to present a gesture, something that was disobedient. And one example would be throwing a piece of gum. I wanted to see it disobedient, but in a disciplined way, like politically correct. And this is organizing all the chewing gum 25 centimeters apart in this presentation. This is pea, sweet pea. This is what we ate very often when we were students, brought from Russia, about 5 millimeters in diameter. I don't remember what we called this one, like hens tied to a sculpture, around the sculpture at the museum. This is a strangled flower. Sorry, this is news that don't sell. I wanted to create something that talked about a poetic situation from a political perspective. And I'm done with this one. Excellent.
Thank you. Your presentation was excellent. I know you answered. You took a different way, but you did answer the question perfectly. How far are we in a crisis? And if that crisis, it's the heritage of the development, that possibility of development, and we're going to fight for that. That's what I was trying to get to with my question. Now a different national reality. And this field, through art, I don't think anybody better than Javier has worked on. With obvious reasons, Javier was born, raised, and lives and shares one of the areas that before was found to be a marginal area. But now it's practically the whole city or the country, many places in the country. In that area of Havana, where those areas are the most violent, those areas is where the violence and weakness, everything that people has to go through because the lack of everything. They have no projects, no food, change in values. Everything that we had talked about here can be centered today in many different areas in our capital, in a general sense in the whole country, but one is where Javier lives. Javier has used that field, his own investigation, not the only one he has, but the main one. Every time I have to define or I have to look at Javier's work, I see it and I repeat it as a word correspondent. His work, it's a direct reaction to this very harsh conflict. In that situation, Javier is at war. And my question is, do you think, even though we're in this war, social war that keeps getting expanded and expanded around us, do you think there is room or possibility for peace, metaphorically speaking? Hello. Yep. Hi. First of all, I wanted to thank you for this invitation, for this opportunity to be in this museum, and all the effort everybody had to put for this amazing exposition or exhibition. First of all, to answer the question for Cristina, I think to define what peace is first. That will be first. What is peace for each one of us? Starting from there, I think the answer to me is that there has not been peace, there is no peace, there won't be any peace in any way. Because the peace of some of you is our war, and there is people, there is institutions, there is governments, there is presidents that they establish some kind of peace for themselves based precisely on the war in their towns, the war of other people or other social groups, etc. So that is my answer in a way. But in the concrete case, I want to go back to your surroundings, your investigation, your research. If it's not now, maybe during your presentation, if you come back to that, because it's very important, it's key. Everything comes down to that all marginal areas that now it's expressed on the behaviors of all the citizens in Cuba. That's where we can see all the conflicts the country is suffering, starting with the economy and ending now. But I'm not gonna force you to it. So I just want to let you talk about it. To me, simply the question is that there is different process of unstable process created in society, and conflicts that are harvested, that they generate chaos. And specifically for the Cuban people, not just to talk about marginal towns, but the whole Cuban people. I do research, and as a matter of fact, I moved to the United States in 2 years, so my way of thinking and seeing things has changed a lot. Obviously, I don't see reality the same way now. Now, when they were talking about different subjects, and one of the things is that Cuba has set up the standards really low. In other places, when you move, the roof is, a lot higher, and in other countries there is no standards. You can define your own limitations, whatever you can. In Cuba, there's something that defines my work. Basically, the question is to focus on the basis. In a way, how the system has worked in maintaining this town with basic needs only, like food. Food is basic needs. You don't have any other way. There's a phrase, if you don't eat, you can't think. So your mind constantly is busy trying to find something basic, food. In the United States, you look for money. Money, you have the infrastructure, complete infrastructure of everything else. In Cuba, not even with money, you can solve your problems. Sometimes you have the money and you still don't have the food, or you have an egg and you don't have the oil to fry it. It's very complex, and every some period of time, there is new unstable systems. For example, if there is people selling specific food, even though they have a license, they make it illegal, their activity illegal, and that creates a chaos in town. Let's say the taxi drivers, we call them boteros. It's just a system owned by the government. It's like Uber, Cuban, without internet, run by the government. The system works. The runs are between 5 and 10 pesos, but it is completely unstable. When they say we're going to pay you, we're going to give you a fine or take your license away. So that affects the transportation in the country. Obviously, this gets to a point where your mind cannot get out of that, trying to rehabilitate constantly from a situation or the new one arising. So they even create, after Fidel Castro's death, with those changes, when they were talking in the previous panel, they thought there was going to be some type of opening. And what has happened with the town is that there is an insensitivity, total insensitivity, because I think, the people are all affected by it. There's a process of a process where your mind is stuck. I think it's a trauma. They can't get out of this trauma. When you move on to the next context, logically, like evolution, when you get to the jungle or to any other country, you have to learn the new system. And it doesn't mean that it's better. It's just completely different. And logically, you start getting detox from the previous system. So it's very complex to establish some light on peace in the Cuban context, something that where everybody will be able to enjoy. Well, based on the precarious conditions, the lacking of everything, that will be probably impossible to reach. Yes, at this process of all the basic needs, that was a very quick snippet, but different things more complex, very complex, paradoxical and humorous too. But there are things that I'm very interested about for my work, because precisely is what happens. It's a subject that I want to develop too in future ideas or plans, like making a movie or something like that. For example, what happens with the human being when it's in an extreme situation, like in the movie Blindness. All of a sudden, there is a general illness, and all of a sudden they have no more food. What happens when they're not food? What does your thought go to? How do you react? What happens when you're unstable like that? How human beings function and survive that process. And in a way, that's what has marked my work in different points. I'm going to show you some images. Basically what I do are little documentary films, little videos. So the last one is Prelude. In this case, I'm talking about the use of the knife in Havana from different three aspects. Kitchen, for feeding. The other aspect would be the religious process, basically sacrificing animals. That's how they use a knife in that context. And the other aspect is violence. It's like a trilogy, very complex one. And the ideal will be to watch the video, but it's not possible in this moment. This moment is explained how it's more effective to just stab the animal, how to use a knife, the kind of knife that is more professional for stabbing somebody. This woman that lost her son. This is interesting because these are people on the streets on their bicycles with the harmonica. When they're, when you hear the sound, you're like, oh, he's going to sharpen our teeth. So then you go out, you bring your nail clippers, you bring your scissors, you bring your knives, and he sharpens it for you. This is a religious ritual when they read with coconuts and they tell you how good or bad things are going for you. This is the animal sacrifice, parallel to the idea of the reality of killing, like the domestic violence, etc., etc. This is just a snippet of killings. They cut people in pieces and they put them in the garbage. And the same, this is the meat that we eat. Kind of shows that the same people that we have relationships and lives is our partner in a way that that person is the one that dies and we eat it. In some ways, talking about the human beings and how we work. So it makes you think about what's right, what's wrong. This is the knife sharpener living in a way, like nothing has happened, blowing his harmonica. This is a different one, variable dimensions, completely different. Women are answering what is the size of the penis they enjoy the most. In my work of art, I consider myself, if I can have to name myself, it would be expressionism. Instead of painting, I make videos. And I try to show things that people don't want to see. They're grotesque and harsh. And again, I try to show what the press or newspapers would never show. This is talking about aesthetics and how women, in many cases, rather to look better than to have more functionality, like on your fingers or on your hands. These are videos also. This image reminds me Edward Scissorhands. He has a hard time trying to do stuff like this. This is the main conflict when you try to use something with those long nails. This is that's a harsh image, but it shows intimacy. This is a different one, black on black. What I did was to interpret Kashmina Levi's work of art, but in an anthropologic way. I would be black on black in the Cuban reality, like in my neighborhood. When it's dark outside, it's very hard to see something. So the reality is that when you're black, you can camouflage in the darkness and go out. This work of art doesn't have much of a meaning. It's just the analysis of color and the possibility of camouflaging or getting close to somebody in the dark. A few years later, 6 or 7 years later, I did white on white, and it's the same. How a white person can do the same in the daylight. So there is a big difference. This information is not in the work, but black on black is on the street in the old Havana, and white on white is done in MIT. That creates a very, very difference in the same context. Light, this work, is where I try to establish an analogy between the candles in a candle holder at the church and the strength with the believers. They light a candle in a religion and what it means, what that light means. But logical, those candles, they melt, they fall, they go out, they steal it, they push it, they throw it down, they melt, there's only half of it. The most interesting thing is the analogy between candles and life, human life, same thing. The paradox is that at 6 p.m. when they close the church, the Father comes and blows all the candles out. So the light is gone. Your dreams, utopias, the intentions. The candle is supposed to burn out completely, and then a prayer goes up to the God. So this is the Cuban appearance, how people try to show power and gold. They pretend to have any economic status, but they don't take care of their hygiene or health. This work is Coliseum. This was part of Seafoam Grand Commission program in 2015. This is an installation. What I did was put into context a group of people from my neighborhood in Havana that were using fish to fight. So basically, they do it for 3 main reasons. In a way to make some money, to pass the time, and to have fun. So what I did is try to put these videos from the same perspective or point of view in the same space that it happened in the neighborhood, giving the different hierarchies to the characters, how you could walk between them, among them, and see the relation. You didn't see the same on every screen, but there was a continuity of movement. If you're running from here or there, you could see on the other screens how it will continue. Okay, let's go to the next one. Yep, I'm almost done. Yes, that's it. You have worked with key pieces. I think it's very clear how your investigative process, your research and analysis, it's very clear now. Thank you. And now, the last question I want to ask Glenda. Well, the only woman of this panel, the only guest in this panel, Glenda was in Houston, and I was lucky enough to be there in the opening for Adiós, Utopia. I heard you in that panel, in that occasion, and I could see how you defended, with all your arguments, the political asepsia in your work, your true intentions. You did a great job, and they were insisting in the political character of your work, and you insisted on the no political intentions you had. Again, I'm here now. I see your work again. I'm looking at it in this context for this exhibition with a specific subject, which is essentially a political subject, among other things, but essentially political. Also, I see what they have written, the labels accompanying the works of art, and I see again that your work of art has the same connotation again, has been given that connotation again. So I'm asking myself, what's the future? Not just your future, but I think for all the works of art produced in the actual Cuban circumstances or that context. Or is it that we all have to see everything in a political view? Or is your own utopia that your work of art is not seen politically?
I really enjoyed to be here in Minneapolis for the first time. Thank you for you to be here and for the invitation. I was just thinking when you said that if this work would be in a context of a show of sexual harassment or like against violence in women, probably this work will work for that as well. Actually, this work will work in any context that is for slavery, against slavery, or for freedom, you know, or with any subject related. I think it's as open, and that's what defines our generation, that probably it can depart the idea from a very specific circumstance in Cuba, in this case, but I'm sure you can read it like Stress from Yoan, or The Flags from Wilfredo. You can read it you don't need to be Cuban to have these ideas, you know. You don't need to be American or whatever to understand. You can understand them from any part of the world, mainly. And I think it's kind of tiring, you know, when you are Cuban and you always have to be talking about politics, you know, because I'm a human being, and when I see the sky, a starry night, you know, I'm sure almost everybody can appreciate the beauty of a starry night. Do you question that if it's capitalist starry night or is it socialist starry night? You know, it's kind of absurd, you know. So that's for me what I you know, the reasons for the things I look at in my life and in my art are more essential. I care more for example, the self development. You know, the self-evolving of a human being. It's about love. It's about, you know, religions, but religion in another way, like spirituality. It's also one of the, and I think my work, as I am the last one, as usually, is the time is running, so I think it's better just to present you my work so you can see what I mean. And well, chewing gum, I'm using chewing gum in some of my work. For example, this work is called Book of Faith. And what I did is I took the books of 5 main religions in the world, you know, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, and so on, the Buddhism and the Hinduism books, and I destroy, and I took all the pages and I made a pulp, you know, like I made new paper from all of that, and I made a new book from all of them. And you can see pieces of words, but actually it's an abstract work, because I'm not actually interested in differences, but in similarities between human beings. And I think, you know, as I said, love is not capitalist. Love is not, you know, it's not socialist. Beauty and freedom is actually, these things are, for me, politic. It's peripheric. You know, the essential thing are not ideological, as Capote said as well. This is pictures of chewing gum in the street, and I did a drawing making constellations. It's called Chew with Stars. Concrete music. This is called The Horizon of the Poolman. And actually is powder of coins making an horizon. Actually talking about you know, like how money has become the horizon of almost everybody in this world, and how poor could be actually the richest person, that he only see the money as a target. And actually, by the way, politic has many meanings, acceptions. Thank you. So, for example, yes, I think also every artist could be politic because we are defining a word, we're defining a position towards the word. This could be politic, but not in a political in the traditional political way. That's also a good thing to clarify. Sorry, this is one of my main installations back in 2007. I did a master in new media in Cologne, Germany, and this was my piece that I graduated with. And I took the 5 main religions of the world, and I translate their name of the gods, like Buddha, Deus, Yahweh, and so on, to Braille. And as music boxes have, a system of dots, so each music box, there are 5 of them, are playing a name of a god. So in the middle, you can hear them all together. And my aim, again, was like to transform this, the faith, the spirituality, which I think is one of the main things in our lives, to an abstract way and to an abstract state, which is the sound, and to, again, dissolve the differences, which, we all know that has created so many wars and deaths in the world. And this is called Habitat. Unfortunately, it's not it's missing some pieces. And it's a fake grass as a duvet, and the pillows are rocks. This is a detail. Oh, no. When this is a detail probably of the previous image. It's called Wasted Time, and it's a big mountain of sand with a half of an hourglass on top, and it's called Wasted Time. Oh, wow. It's creative. The problem is creative. It's not the image. So this is another detail of an installation. It's called In 3 Times, and there are 3 hourglasses. And the first one has powder of money. The second one has powder of gold, and the third one is apparently empty. But you can hear this sign for listening, and you can hear the heart beating inside. It's based on a book called Momo from Michael Ende. I don't know if you ever have read this beautiful book. And there is a sentence saying, time is life and life is in the heart. Silence is golden. So this is powder of gold, making a music score, an empty music score. Fake natural flowers, and one flower, single flower, which was artificial, planted in the sand. This was made in 2000, and I was interested in the process of how they die, and the artificial was keeping alive. It was a question between artificial and natural, eternal and ephemeral. This is a detail.
Okay, Glenda, if you are satisfied with yourself,
Yeah.
I ask
I hope
you
I
to
ask
be
you.
disciplined with your time.
I hope I answer your question.
You always did it. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's time for some questions. I'm really happy to have this opportunity. I tried to do it in the best way, trying to listen to very personal experiences and anecdotes, so fresh. And at the end, even, at least for me, even when I receive some questions some answers that looks like not so optimistic, I really think that all of you are. In fact, even in the worst situation, they are looking for an open door, and that's the taste I would like to save for us in Cuba and for the future. So questions, and you are ready for? for invention.
Hi, how are you all? Hola, me llamo Nicole, soy de Puerto Rico. Oh, sorry. Oh, thank you so much. Hi, how are you all? Thank you for being here. I'm amazed because I just came here to Minneapolis to visit my brother who just moved. I'm from Puerto Rico. So I'm touched because my father's Cuban. He left when he was 9. My mother's Spanish, and she came to Puerto Rico when she was very little too. The interesting thing is that we just got hit by Hurricane Maria, and I can relate a lot to what you've said today. Me puedo relacionar muchísimo por todo lo que han dicho en el día de hoy, ¿no? Porque Puerto Rico sí estamos pasando en este momento, nuestra generación, por algo que nunca habíamos experimentado. Puerto Ricans are now living something that we have never experienced before. You know, we have shortage of water and food. I myself am a news anchor in Puerto Rico, and I've been giving the news for many years about, for example, Venezuela and how they're living over there and how they don't get or don't have medicine or water or different basic stuff. And all of a sudden giving the news about something similar of my country was surreal at a certain point. And I guess it must be surreal too for you guys in Cuba, especially for you that you lived that transition and you felt like in a limbo stage at some point in your life, probably as I am feeling now in my country. I see so many people my age, I'm 33, that could not deal with the pressure and they just left. But myself, I want to stay there. I want to push through. And my question goes to you all. Most of you still live in Cuba. So my question is, how do you keep a consistent heart and mind and soul to be there in the country that saw you being born? How do you do it? Because my heart is in my island, but sometimes I know we are limited in some areas, but then you want to do so many big things, and maybe doing big things is at some point going abroad. So how do you do it from the Havana in your cases? Because I can relate, because I want to stay in my country, but at some point there is like this trigger or this excitement in going somewhere else and develop somewhere else.
Javier.
There is a very important detail. In Puerto Rico, you can live. In Cuba, you cannot live, you know? So you have to resist and continue or change, you know, yourself.
And in Puerto Rico was natural disaster. In Cuba was a human disaster. So simple as that. And so that we remain in Cuba to try to fix this human disaster. We are our own FEMA, okay?
And I think that when somebody wants to leave Cuba, they make it. I know so many friends, and when they were obsessed with going outside, they always find a way. But in Cuba, when somebody have the conviction inside, could be personal like mine, could be political like other crazy people, could be. This is something that I think characterized Cubans in the history. And I'm not, how can I say, a nationalist or whatever, but in my own experience, something that makes you feel good is when you go over the wave. And in my own life, I'm one a good example that you, whatever you are, you can make it. because I did couple fellowships, but I never tried to live outside of Cuba, and I just do my work at the highest human level I could. And when you do that from your heart, whoever you are, you will make it.
Yes, see. That was probably the answer I was looking for. I know we can live as Puerto Ricans. I know. But I'm talking about the more human side of things, as Glenda was talking. You know, yeah, I know it's not the same circumstances. I understand it perfectly. I started by saying that my dad's Cuban, so I do know the history of Cuba, and I know how it felt, but I'm just talking about in a more human perspective. No one knows what happened in Cuba or the experiences you experienced but yourself. And no one knows what we are going through in Puerto Rico but ourselves. So it's not a comparison. I was just talking from the heart, and a comparison human by human, human for human, of how we go through necessities and how you push through in your own country besides the difficulties we have. So thank you.
Sorry about that. Just remember something. I had to go to obligated in Cuba. You have to go to the army. And in the army, you have to pass la previa, which is 45 years in the very, very difficult, days. But for me, were like years. In a very, very difficult situation. When that came to me, I had good friends in the black business in Cuba, and they say, I'm going to pay, you don't need to go. And I said, no, I want to go. I want to go not because patriotic, I just want to show myself I will be at the highest. And it will prepare me for the difficult life that this country seems to have for a long time. So I went to the Previa. I was with the worst people there. I came from the Previa to the ISA. I have the ISA. So there is certain persons in life that I think all of us in certain way did it too. And in Cuba it's full of these people, forget the politics, that feel a lot of integrity and happiness with yourself when you say, I made that, I pass over the problem in a human level, and it contributes to make you stronger and makes you a better person, I think.
The cherry on top is that we pay taxes, that pay FEMA, the help they're giving us, that's one. And two, Puerto Rico is changing very rapidly thanks to our own organizations and the heart of us all that are uniting to make things better over there, just for you to know.
Good for you. Good for you. Y me gustaría agregar, I would like to add that the panorama, the scenario that with all of these answers we try to create is not, of course, the total truth. And we have to respect the many thousands of Cuban people that live with us in Havana or in Santiago de Cuba in the worst situation. And when they decide to leave, we have to respect a lot that position.
And when they decide to stay too.
And when they decide to stay. And, sorry, may I finish my idea? Okay, Yaima, thank you. And also, you are listening, all of you are listening, a very special group of persons here. Okay, first of all, they are very intelligent, talent, they are brave, they are artists. That means they have a high level of spirituality, is it correct? That helps a lot, okay? They have opportunities to go back and forth. They have a relative different economic, financial situation in relation with others, very well deserved, of course. So it's not black and white, okay? And really, the situation is very difficult, but I try, I'm answered by myself, by my inner feeling. I try to be the side of Wilfredo when he said, crisis make you better. And it's the spirit I would like to share with all my friends and my neighbors, my family. My daughter has your age, and she's in Cuba, and she's brave, and she decided, with all possibilities to live, she decided for now, at least for now, to stay. But if she, in 2, 3, 4 years, asks me, what do you think and the situation, even with all the effort of all of us living there have not changed, I can answer her, go away. And I will respect her position. But for now, we have the responsibility, at least is what I feel, to stay as much as possible. And I'm happy to see many of my friends of my generation, I mean the generation of the 80s, coming back to Cuba to do art, to buy properties, thanks God now is possible, to try to improve some of them, their financial situation from outside, making business in Cuba. That's new. So, I mean, there is a big panorama. It's complex, but it's in transition. I don't want to close the possibility to the utopia. It's my personal position. Another question, please. Perdón, Yaima. Perdona.
I wanted to talk about the situation of living. I think when we stop seeing the situation as a dramatic situation, because at the end, in the entire world, there are immigration situation in the whole world. When we stop seeing this as a dramatic situation, and we see that the movement, the freedom of movement of all of us becomes something possible, when for example, all this problematic, like for example, living is not anymore a problem or a dramatic something, then all this kind of confusion is gonna stop, because at the end nobody lives. You always stay, because the world now is open. It's something like everything is connected. The only problem is the borders we create. But at the end, when all these borders or we forget about all these problems or political problems or borders, when we understand that the world now is totally connected in another level, I think we don't gonna think anymore about the living or the staying, because it's in the moment when we have freedom of movement, freedom of thinking, freedom of mind. So at the end, any Cuban leaves, never. Like the mother, like Olga, she never left. She sent food to Cuba.
I can assure that she never left.
Nobody leaves.
No, never.
No, you never leave your country, because you are citizen of this world.
Thank you, Yaima. And another question, please.
I just want to say that, by the way, ¿no? ¿Me lo apagaron?
Censura.
I want to say that just the work you have behind is exactly what Yaima have said.
Okay. More questions? We are ready. We are not tired, not at all.
It's cold over here. It's more cold inside.
Please.
Hello. I'm very fortunate, to be here to listen, about the side of Cuba that is not easy to get, because you are open up, your minds. But I want, to also make sure that you open your hearts, because what I heard, it is an intellectual position as to what your art is. But I want to make sure that, but first that you are an artist, you are a human being, and you are a Cuban. And nobody can take that from you. So what I'm saying is, about the future, I see Cuba. I love Cuba, not because I'm a Cuban, because I believe, in the dream. I don't call it utopia. There's a concrete things, that and also I wanted to hear from you, since you are product of the revolution, if you think, the future of Cuba remains, but the possible within a socialist communist, but the regime. So that's what I'm thinking. But an appeal, to you, not as a political, but individual, but also as a way, to see, how can we work together, both inside and outside, to make a better Cuba and to make a better world.
Okay, I'm sorry, I want to say something. We are product of Cuban Revolution, of course, because the age, even Figueroa, okay, I'm sorry, Figo, even Figueroa. But we are not responsible for the mistakes, okay? Not anymore. We want to change our life. The only difference is we want to change with the talent we have, with the effort we can make, with the decisions, personal decisions we are doing, and we want to be part of that change. Okay? But, I mean, oh my God, I cannot, I cannot describe a new I'm not a political person, so I cannot describe a new political system. I cannot describe a whole...
An intellectual can give political solutions because we didn't study politics.
Maybe it's so simple. Revolution, take out the R. Make evolution, my friend. That's mean change the people who run the country. So simple as that. Open the power to the young people. Not to me, I'm 71. To young people. So simple as that. Evolution. And keep in mind that this is the best for us.
Hello. I want to acknowledge you and thank you for all the wonderful work that you've done. I'm moved by your work. And I just have a question. What stays with me is I think Yoan is your name? Yeah, your work is, for me, it's outstanding. I just have a question about the teeth. The teeth, how many teeth do you use for that piece?
Teeth? Oh, man. I start to... I think in Cuban art, there is something related to collective, to analyze the collective situation, since, as you see, we are a couple people in this room and we are trying to solve the world. And it's the same happening with Cuba, maybe with the artists that feel kind of responsibility with express what happens to others. So when I was thinking in this piece, I just came to take my wisdom teeth to do the piece with a big block of film, a ball on only my wisdom teeth supporting. Maybe artistically it could be more interesting, but even the dentist, when I explained the idea, said to me, "Oh man, I'm
going to say it in Cuban because he didn't say. He said, man, you cannot fight with this. That you want to stay in Cuba is your problem, not mine. I can't fight with that. So if you're going to make this work of art, look, I have this.
As if you are going to do a piece with that, here I have, a bunch of recipients where I put all the wisdom teeth of people that I have to do a lot of the week in a week, and I just almost don't get paid. So he was actually, and I finished like a psychologist for the guy because he was talking to me about his own stress. And so I look at that, and I went to my studio. I took all the teeth. He connected me with other clinics.
Okay.
But I had a lot of connection with people in the black market of antiques. Okay. So in Cuba, we have to learn to survive. As I told you, you said, how survive this guy in the middle of the Havana in the special period. how everybody invent. We call it specialists of the air. So we have I have a lot of connection in the street. So I talk to the people that I know in the black market of antique and other things. And I said, I need teeth. So one of them said to me, oh man, you know, I have a kind of, a lot of friends that are archaeologists that doesn't have job. It's good for you in those areas of the big battles of, you know, the areas of, in Pinar del Rio happened so many battlefields in this independence war. And these people live in Pinar del Rio. So I said, okay, that's actually add another meaning to the piece, because the issue of oppression, sadness, resistance, the history of Cuba is full of that. So I said, okay, if you want. So I finished, I put advertising outside my studio. I buy teeth. So, yeah, it's almost another work. So I started having a bunch of them. And actually now come the part that is really spiritual, because the persons, actually I believe in a kind of faith that doesn't have connection with paranormal issues. But these Cubans believe in Afro-Cuban spirit with all these issues. And I think has a lot of interesting experience, because I put to work in that piece to so many people that didn't know about the work and where is the provenance. But those people had a incredibly tough paranormal experience after working with me in the work. And one of the person that really believe in Afro-Cuban things came to me and said, that piece, you can sell it to a private, because this piece has the DNA of a lot of sadness, of a lot of people supporting in this country. Don't do business to a collector private. So casually, by coincidence, in Cuba arrived Stephen Cohen, the big famous guy of the $12 million of the shark, and came to the studio and wants the piece. And I remember the Babalao, oh, you can't do business with the people. And I was really, I said, no, but how I found a museum for that? And he said, no, it will come, it will come. And well, Mari Carmes, you were sent by God. Then I took that burden, a spiritual burden of do deal with a private person and to do that homage to my ancestors and to this country that had a very sad history, not only after communism, but even before. Because the problem of Cuba, all of us are trying to think after 59, our problems, and this is your homework, to read this history of our country, and you will have better answer that we can give you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was
Very
powerful.
well. Very well. So I have instructions from the boss. The boss is Olga, to stop the conversation. I think it's because it's time for the worker to close. I don't know the reason, or I want to thanks again to everybody, especially to the artists. Olga, thank you.
And I just want to, is it on? I want to thank everyone for coming. As we've watched actually the audience through the course of the day, everyone's come in closer into the center of the conversation. And I just want to thank all the panelists who were in the audience and at the table here for just sharing so much. And the great questions that have come from the audience all day, where I think we've gotten really deep and opened up some great conversations. So thank you all. Enjoy your day. The galleries are closed now, but come back tomorrow, and over the next 3 months, the show will be here until March 18th. And please grab the brochure with related events and programs throughout the winter months. Thanks for joining us today. Take care. Bye-bye.